So when you hear the words real estate, what's the first thing that pops in your head? Probably buying a home, right? Or maybe selling a property. But what if I told you that the most important, the most critical decisions, well, they happen long before anyone even thinks about a transaction. Today, we're diving deep into the world of real estate consultancy. We're talking about the strategic minds behind the biggest moves in the property game. Let's get into it.
Okay, first things first, we have to get one thing straight. Real estate at the highest level isn't really about sales. It's about strategy. And that is exactly where consultants come in. And their role, you'll see, is completely different from what most of us are used to.
Here's the most crucial distinction you need to know. A real estate broker, their main job is to bring a buyer and a seller together and close a deal. It's all about the transaction. A consultant, on the other hand, takes a huge step back. They're looking at the entire chessboard, and their job is to give expert advice and strategic guidance to get the absolute most value out of a property.
And listen, this isn't just some fancy job title somebody made up. Here in the Philippines, there's a law, the Real Estate Service Act, that legally defines what a consultant is. They're a professional who gives analysis and recommendations for a fee. Now that last part is key. They're not paid a commission on a sale. You pay them for their expertise. And that, right there, changes the entire dynamic. So let's see how this actually works in the real world. I want you to imagine you're an investor. You've got capital, it's ready to go. And now you are staring down one of the most fundamental questions in the entire world of finance and real estate.
And here it is. This is it. The single most important question a consultant helps an investor answer. Should you buy, should you hold, or should you sell? It sounds so simple, doesn't it? But the analysis that goes into making that decision is unbelievably complex. Weighing up all the risks, the potential returns, and of course, market timing.
All right, let's put a real number on this to make it concrete. Let's say you have 50 million pesos ready to invest. Where does it go? Just throwing it at the first nice-looking property you see? That's a surefire way to lose money. This is exactly where a consultant's data-driven, objective advice is worth its weight in gold.
See, a consultant isn't guessing. They're not going with their gut. They're analyzing hard data. They'd look at the estimated yields across different sectors. So in this case, office condos are yielding about 6%, apartments a little better at 7%, but look at warehouse leasing. It's at 9%. Now why is that? Well, they'd point to huge market trends, like the explosion in e-commerce and logistics. The advice that comes from this data is crystal clear. The smart money is moving into warehouses. Okay, let's flip the script. Let's switch perspectives for a minute. What if you're not an investor with a pile of cash, but you're a landowner with a valuable piece of property? The problem looks different, but believe me, the need for strategic advice is just as crucial. Now, you have to find its best use. This is the million-dollar question, or sometimes the billion-dollar question, for anyone who owns land. You've got a totally blank canvas, so what do you build on it to generate the highest possible value from that dirt? This whole process is what the industry calls a highest and best use analysis. And it is a super rigorous process. A consultant will take any potential idea and run it through these 4 critical tests. First, is it even legal? Does it comply with the local zoning laws? Second, is it physically possible? Can you actually build it on that specific lot? Third, is it financially feasible? In other words, will it actually make any money? And only if an idea passes all 3 of those tests do we finally ask the big one, is it the most profitable option out there?
Just look at this example of a property right on a major highway. Sure, a residential subdivision might be physically possible, but the limited access makes it a really poor choice. A little commercial strip mall? Well, there's some demand, but it's moderate. But what about a warehouse? That taps directly into that high-demand logistics sector we just talked about. The analysis points to one clear winner that's going to maximize that land's value.
All right, let's up the stakes again. Now, imagine you're a developer. You've already decided what you want to build. Let's say it's a new condo tower. You are about to put an enormous amount of capital on the line. You absolutely need to know, will this thing actually work?
This right here, this is the moment of truth for any developer. A great idea on a blueprint can turn into a spectacular failure in the real world. A consultant's job at this stage is to be the skeptic, to stress test that brilliant idea against cold, hard market realities and the actual numbers.
And they do this by looking at 2 sides of the very same coin. On one side, you have the market analysis. This basically asks, is there a customer for this? It's all about external factors like demand and what the competition is doing. On the other side, you have the feasibility analysis.
This looks inward and asks, do the numbers actually work? It dives deep into construction costs, potential revenues, and ultimately, profitability. You have to get a big yes on both sides to get a green light.
So what drives demand, especially in a dynamic market like the Philippines? Well, consultants are constantly tracking key indicators like these. Is the BPO sector expanding? Are OFW remittances staying strong? Is the government building a new airport or highway nearby? Any one of these factors can make or break a project.
So let's take a real-world example, like a planned condotel in Macdon. A consultant would dig into tourism data, check the occupancy rates of all the competitors, and analyze the soaring development costs. If the numbers show the market is already saturated or construction is just too expensive, their advice might be to change the project, or maybe even to just wait. And that advice could save the developer from a massive financial mistake.
So far, we've looked at single properties, single projects. But what about the really big players, the large corporations, the investment funds that own dozens, maybe even hundreds of different properties? Well, that's when the complexity just explodes, and that requires a whole other level of strategy.
This is the challenge, at the absolute highest level of real estate strategy. How do you make sure your collection of office buildings, your shopping malls, your warehouses, all of it, is working together like a well-oiled machine to meet your financial goals? You need a portfolio-level view.
And a key strategy here, as in all investing, is diversification. It's the old saying, you don't put all your eggs in one basket. By owning assets across all these different sectors, you've got residential for steady income, industrial to catch that logistics boom. You can balance out the risks and create a portfolio that's much more resilient to shocks in any one area. And you know, managing a portfolio isn't a passive activity. You can't just set it and forget it. It's about constant optimization. A consultant is always providing advice on these three key actions: which new properties to acquire to get into hot new markets, which solid performers to retain for their stability, and, just as importantly, which underperforming assets it's finally time to sell. So, as we've seen through all these examples, real estate consultancy isn't some one-size-fits-all service. It's all about matching very specific, very complex problems with highly specialized expertise. And this table just brings it all together so perfectly. If you're an investor, your problem is maximizing returns, so you need investment advisory. If you're a landowner, you need a highest and best use analysis. A developer needs that crucial feasibility study, and a big corporation needs portfolio management. See? Every client, every objective has its own tailored advisory service.
So why does any of this really matter? What's the bottom line? It's this. Consultants do so much more than just give opinions. They help turn static assets, a boring piece of land, an old building, into productive, profitable investments. And they do it by using data and strategy to systematically cut down the risk and unlock all that hidden long-term value.
Look, if you take away only one single thing from our time together, let it be this. At its absolute core, consultancy is about shifting our focus away from the short-term transaction and onto the long-term strategy. It's about making smarter, data-backed decisions that build real, lasting wealth.